Before we move on to our next advanced topic, there was one last little thing that I want to talk about with validation. We've seen how to explicitly validate a record and with both validate sync, and we also spoke a little bit about the validate function as well, but we haven't actually seen how these things get called in the wild, like how we actually call these in a real application. Traditionally, in a real application, we'll end up relying upon the fact that we cannot save invalid records to our database. So whenever we have an invalid record, so like a name or a user without a name or a user with a name that's really short, Mongoose will disallow us from inserting a record into the database. So I think it'd probably be a really good use of time to make sure that we get another test in here to make sure that's actually the case. So underneath our second test, I'm going to add on a third one. And I'm going to give this a description of disallows invalid records from being saved. And we'll add in our function with the done callback. So if we create an invalid record and then we just attempt to save it, like we're not even going to call validate sync or validate or anything like that, if we just attempt to save it, the save request should, or the save operation should just flat out fail, and we should be able to get access to some type of validation message, just like we saw before. So inside of this test, I'm going to create a new user. I'm going to make sure that they have some invalid attributes. So I'm going to give them a name of Al. So definitely invalid right now. Next, I'll call user.save. So whenever this save gets called, we should see a promise that gets rejected. So up till now, we've always been adding on a then case. But when a promise gets rejected, like in the case that user is invalid, we won't be dealing with a .then case. Instead, we'll be dealing with a .catch. So catch will be called if we try to save an invalid record. So inside this catch, we can add in a little bit of error handling logic, or at least in this case, an assertion to make sure that we got a validation result with the correct error message. So catch will be called with our validation result, and then we can add a identical assert to the ones that we've seen up here to make sure that validation result has our error message. So we'll say const message, and we've got our curly braces on here, again to make some use of ES6. Validation result dot errors dot name. So this is again the error message that we defined inside of our schema file inside of our user model. So because we entered a username that is too short, again I'm going to expect to see an error message of something like name must be longer than 2 characters. So I'm going to copy paste this string right here again just so I don't have to risk any typos. And then we'll assert that message is equal to that error message we were just looking at. One thing that I really like to do whenever handling these error messages is certainly copy paste directly from the model file, the error message. It's incredibly easy to just drop off like, a period at the end or something like that. And then you end up with an assertion that's failing and you'll sit there and wonder to yourself, why in the world is my assertion failing? This doesn't make any sense because you don't notice that period at the very end. It's just a little bit of a tip there. So then after we make our assertion, because this was an asynchronous test, we need to make sure that we call our done callback. So I can add on done. We'll save it, and let's flip over to the terminal and see how we're doing. Cool, 16 tests passing now. So that means that we are successfully catching the fail to insert this new record into our database because it is not a valid record. So again, in practice, this is how you will usually see validation implemented. We'll attempt to save a record, and then if it successfully saves, we can send a response off to a user who's pending on a request or something like that. Or in the case that it's invalid, we can handle it appropriately inside of the catch statement. Okay, so now I think we're all in a good place with validation. Let's start tackling our next advanced topic in the next section.